The day I realized my daughter knew why her father disappeared, my hands went numb before my heart did. Because a child doesn't keep a secret like that unless someone taught her how to survive it. My husband vanished without saying goodbye. No note on the counter, no angry text, no slammed door to echo back at me later. One moment, he was part of my life. The next, he was a question no one could answer. That night still lives in my body. I remember it in pieces, like broken glass you don't notice until you bleed. I was standing in the kitchen, stirring tea I never drank. The kettle had already clicked off, but I kept the spoon moving, watching the steam curl upward like it was trying to escape. The smell of cardamom hung in the air, warm, familiar, safe. Everything felt normal enough to fool me. Our daughter, Sarah, was in her room doing homework. She was 15 then, old enough to understand when something felt wrong, young enough to believe she could fix it by staying quiet. I checked the clock, 8:12 p.m. He was late. That wasn't unusual. He worked long hours, and I had learned not to ask too many questions. Marriage teaches you that, when to speak, when to let silence do the work. I told myself he'd walk through the door any minute, shrugging off his coat, apologizing with a tired smile. But he didn't. By 9, my tea had gone cold. By 10, the house felt stretched too thin, like it was holding its breath. I called his phone. It rang until it didn't. I called again. Voicemail. No message. Just that hollow beep that makes your stomach drop. Midnight came quietly, no headlights outside, no footsteps on the porch. I stood by the living room window, watching the streetlight flicker. The air outside looked heavy, damp, like rain that couldn't decide whether to fall. Inside, the ticking of the hallway clock grew louder, each second pressing against my chest. That was the moment fear slipped in, softly, politely, like it planned to stay. I walked to Sarah's room and knocked. She was sitting on her bed, knees pulled to her chest, her book closed in her lap. The desk lamp cast shadows across her face, making her look older somehow, tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. "Your dad still isn't home," I said. She nodded. No question, no worry, just a nod. Something inside me tightened, but I ignored it. Parents get good at that. Brushing off the things that don't fit because the alternative is too painful. I told her to try to sleep, brushing her hair back. Her skin felt cool under my fingers. She didn't look at me when she said, "Okay." I slept alone that night for the first time in years, listening to the sound of a house that suddenly felt too big. His side of the bed stayed untouched. The sheets were smooth, cold. Morning came without answers. His toothbrush was dry. His shoes were gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called his office. They said he hadn't shown up. I called his brother, his friends, anyone whose number I could find. No one had heard from him. No one knew anything. By the end of the first week, the police were asking questions I couldn't answer. What was he wearing? I didn't know. Did he seem upset? I wasn't sure. Any recent arguments? None worth disappearing over. Each question made me feel like I was failing some invisible test. Life didn't pause for my confusion. Sarah still had school. I still had work. I packed lunches with shaking hands, signed permission slips I barely read, paid bills while staring at numbers that no longer felt real. And Sarah changed. Not in loud, obvious ways. She didn't cry or scream or act out. She became careful, quiet, watchful. She started locking her door at night. She flinched when my phone buzzed. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at me like she was measuring how much I could handle. One night I passed her room and saw light spilling from under the door long after midnight. I knocked. The light snapped off instantly. "I was just reading," she said. Her voice was steady, too steady. People stopped asking about my husband by the second month. Concern faded into discomfort. At the grocery store, some avoided my eyes. Others whispered sympathy that felt like judgment dressed up as kindness. "He wouldn't just leave," one woman said, squeezing my hand. But the thought had already settled into me like a bruise. Maybe he did. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe the life we built wasn't what he wanted anymore. One evening, I found one of his old jackets still hanging in the closet. I pressed my face into the fabric, breathing in the faint trace of soap and aftershave. My chest tightened, not just with grief, but anger. That was the night I stopped waiting. I started digging through old paperwork, bank statements, old emails, documents we hadn't touched in years. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary, until I noticed a pattern. Small legal fees, paid in cash withdrawals, spread out carefully over months. The dates were old, from before Sarah was born. When I asked Sarah about her father, gently, cautiously, she snapped. "Why can't you just let it go?" she said, her hands clenched in her lap, her jaw tight. I looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't just grieving, she was guarding something. That night, lying beside the empty space where my husband should have been, a terrible thought settled over me. What if he didn't disappear because he wanted to leave? What if he disappeared because someone forced him to? And what if my daughter had been protecting that secret all along? The clock kept ticking in the dark, and for the first time I understood something clearly. Whatever truth was coming, it was going to change all three of us. The first thing I noticed after that night was how carefully Sarah watched her words. Not just what she said, but what she didn't. Our mornings settled into a quiet routine. I woke up early, made toast and eggs, poured orange juice into the same chipped glass she'd used since childhood. The radio stayed off. Silence felt safer somehow. Sarah moved through the kitchen like a guest, polite and distant, thanking me for breakfast, even though she never had before. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked one morning. She shrugged. "Fine." That word again, always fine. I watched her shoulders tense when my phone buzzed on the counter. I watched her exhale when it wasn't him. I watched her flinch when the doorbell rang. Children don't act like that without a reason. I tried to make myself believe I was projecting. Grief can turn you suspicious. Fear can rewrite ordinary behavior into something darker. I reminded myself she was a teenager dealing with a missing father and a mother barely holding herself together. Still, something felt wrong. The first real crack came 2 weeks later, on a rainy afternoon when the power went out. We were sitting in the living room, candles lit, rain tapping against the windows in steady, impatient beats. Sarah sat curled up on the opposite couch, hoodie pulled over her head. I was folding laundry, the slow, mindless work grounding me. "Your dad used to hate storms," I said casually. "Remember how he'd unplug everything?" Sarah stiffened. He changed," she said. I looked up. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." But her voice had wavered, just slightly. "Enough." That night, I lay awake replaying every interaction from the last 2 months, every pause, every sharp reply, every look that lasted a second too long. I realized something then that made my chest ache. Sarah wasn't angry at her father. She was afraid for him. The next morning, I found her backpack by the door, half open. I wasn't snooping, at least that's what I told myself. A notebook peeked out, its pages dog-eared and worn. When I lifted it, a folded piece of paper slipped onto the floor. I froze. Parents cross invisible lines every day without realizing it. This felt like one of those moments, where you either step back or learn something you can't unlearn. I picked up the paper. It wasn't a letter, it was a list. Names, dates, times, short phrases written in Sarah's careful handwriting. Warehouse, River Road, don't answer unknown numbers, delete messages. My hands began to shake. I put everything back exactly as I found it. I didn't mention it at breakfast. I didn't look at her too long. I waited. Waiting had become my specialty. That afternoon, I went to the local library under the excuse of returning a book. Instead, I pulled up old news articles on one of the public computers. I searched my husband's name. Nothing recent. Then I searched his old workplace, a construction company he'd left years ago. I remembered the stress back then, the late nights, the phone calls he took outside, the way he'd gone quiet for months before suddenly quitting. One article caught my eye. Former employee charged in equipment theft case. The name wasn't my husband's, but the details felt uncomfortably familiar. Same year, same company, same warehouse on River Road. I felt a chill run through me. That night, I confronted Sarah. Not angrily, not dramatically. I sat beside her on her bed, the way I used to when she was little and scared of the dark. You don't have to protect me.